Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of After Wednesday. I am your host, Jeffrey Hayes, back again with another great interview this week. I want to take a moment to thank my interview from last week, Matt Miner and Sean Gorman. I believe that New York Comic-Con is happening soon, and that they both will be attending. So if you want to, go back, listen to the show, and pick up on a couple things for them. My guest tonight is a very, very interesting writer, artist, and creator, and I'm so pleased he's able to take some time out to talk to me, to talk to y'all. I have an interview tonight with Curt Pires. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I want to jump right into it. I want to begin by asking you about, I was looking over your website, curtpires.com, which I'm going to bring up here for everyone to see. And as I was reviewing it, I was really struck by two things on it. And the first thing that I enjoyed about it was this quote you made where you said, "Tumblr is a really cool open space where information can just flow, and I want to see how far we can take it." And I was really struck by that use of "we." It raised a question of, or an idea for me of sort of art as a collective living, breathing experience. And I wanted to ask you, is that something that you feel about that, or sort of what is the importance to you of art and community?
So in the instance you're talking about on Tumblr, in terms of that, I feel like the whole point of Tumblr is it's really just like basically this giant open space, right, where we're all the access to information is basically unfiltered and uninhibited, right? So the idea of like building a network on Tumblr and like sort of eradicating the walls between the boundary to information and just traditional social walls we erect on these social media websites is interesting to me because, you know, theoretically, if everyone followed everyone on Tumblr, we could circulate ideas, messages, memes, information much faster than, you know, very many other mediums. So to get to the idea of that, it's like a lot of what I've been seeing on Tumblr lately is reports in regards to abuse that U.S. law enforcement is committing against ethnic minorities, stretching as far to being murders, basically. And these aren't being reported anywhere else, right? But on Tumblr we have this free-flowing exchange, and we're getting this information that otherwise would be swept under the rug, sort of hidden by U.S. government, spread at an alarming volume because we have this medium, we can do it. So that's in regards to Tumblr, what I'm kind of talking about there. And then in terms of art, I think there's sort of two separate layers to that question, because art, once you create it and put it out there, it's really everyone's, so it is really a collaborative thing. But in the act of creating the art, like when I'm crafting something, I try not to think about what the audience wants or what they need, because it's really it's not a way to make good art. Is not to do. You don't make art by committee, right? I've never done that. I don't want to do that. But once it's out there in the world, yeah, it really belongs to everyone. So there's kind of two dimensions to that answer.
When did you first become aware of that idea that once you put art out into the world, it is no longer really yours? Or really, when you create art, I want to make sure that I'm sort of synthesizing what you're saying. It's sort of when you subconsciously, when you create art, you kind of already know that it's going to go out there and it's going to be interpreted and reinterpreted. Where did that begin for you? Where did the seed of that idea sort of begin?
Geez, I don't know if I can even really trace back to where I formulated that idea. It's such a general concept. I don't really believe I can pinpoint where precisely I encountered that, but I just think in general, right? Like once you put something out there, it really belongs to everyone, and everyone's gonna form their own ideas about what you created, what it means, where the narrative went, all that kind of stuff, right? So I don't think it belongs to everyone, but it still belongs to me in a way that I'll have a relationship with the art always that's very different from my readership or viewers or anything. But once you put it out there, a lot of the fun is people formulating their own ideas about what you've created, putting stuff together, and putting their own spin on it. Even if it isn't what were even thinking about when you're creating it, that's a really cool layer to that sort of interaction.
Have you ran into anything where you've sort of been completely taken aback by someone's interpretation of something that you've posted or created?
Uh, well, yeah, it happens to me quite a bit. Where just like it's always really cool when you put something out there and then someone picks up on the cool stuff in it or the stuff that you maybe hit a little deeper than just that very surface reading of it. So like it had this happen to me even today actually is I Pop 2 came out yesterday, and a reviewer over at Multiversity Comics, Sam Labas, is reviewing it. And she just sort of sent me a direct message on Twitter to let me know she's reviewing it, and that she's thought it was beautiful, and she enjoyed it. And I just basically messaged her back to say thank you. And then she messaged me a bit later on, asking me, were you specifically trying to put the idea of the anima/animus in it, or am I just reading too much into it, right? And that's really cool. That's really cool for me because this is someone who's reviewing this that's picking up on very deep stuff. That's not just it's not just plot stuff. It's not just did this character do this? It's very a very educated reading of it. So it's really cool when people read my stuff and approach it with those ideas or just throw that out there.
So you don't necessarily have a problem then with the critical community applying certain types of criticism to your work as long as there is a grounded lens of some type maybe being used, or?
I mean, I can't really control that at all, so I don't know. It's always nice when people are being educated about things. Yes, I mean, uh, the critical community in comics is not particularly rich. It's mostly, I don't know, not to get in too deep into this negative train of thought, but I just don't think there's really that much great comics journalism going on.
Sure, sure.
So I mean, when you see stuff like that, it's almost the opposite of what I'm mentioning there. It's like really well thought out, intelligent humans reaching out and asking you about deep concepts. So more of that in comics and less of the we read your book on Tuesday night, free PDF. We didn't think about it at all. Here's a review we rushed out. Like really, no one wants to read that. You're just wasting your fucking time.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. I want to talk about too. You had posted recently on the CurtPires.com a short story about Mulholland, where the character calls himself at one point Charles Bukowski. I know Charles Bukowski, and are you drawn to his poetry, or was that just random? What's the appeal of Bukowski for you? Sort of, what is that? What does Bukowski represent in relation to what you create?
Well, in regards to what you're referencing, it's actually not the main character referring to himself as Charles Bukowski.
Okay.
It's the woman he meets at the bar, and she calls him Charles Bukowski because he's just sort of this drunk, this drunk writer, in this case at the Chateau Marmont bar, and he's speaking very much in in riddles and in poetry to her. So she kind of calls him on his shit, and she's just sort of poking fun at the sort of archetype that he represents.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find Charles Bukowski's work very intriguing. and the personality of Charles Bukowski, sort of this volatile, self-destructive, uh, drunk writer. I've been reading Women for the first time
Uh-huh.
as Bukowski. I don't know. I think I'm just naturally intrigued by that kind of stuff, just as a writer and as a human, because just looking at that, sometimes you see parallels in my own life and what Bukowski does. Although I'm nowhere near uh, sort of as volatile a personality as Charles Bukowski, but always intrigued with that and sort of just the mythology of people who create literature, but also just there's a loneliness to it that I don't know is intriguing, and you sometimes see that in Bukowski's work. And in that short story I wrote, that was sort of what it was really about.
And I think that's interesting. You touch on that. You talk about that loneliness and the isolation of the creator or someone who is creating, which could be, of course, primarily from I guess from your point of view. Then is that it's about the writer, but I want to transition to Theremin because I thought that after thinking about that short story, and then I had recently reread Theremin. Uh, Theremin seems to play with a lot of ideas and seems to be changing as you change, issue to issue. As I read through it, and then I was reading the notes, the wonderful notes section you had in the back of each issue. And one quote first from Theremin that I really thought was intriguing was, comic books, even more so than music, I'd say, are something that seems to be perpetually haunted by the ghosts of our influences. And as you read Theremin, you're in also in the notes section as well. You mentioned, your comics influences are people like Grant Morrison and Matt Fraction and Joe Casey and you know Jonathan Hickman. Can you sort of expand a little bit on that idea you were talking about this that comics seem to be perpetually haunted by the ghost of our influences?
Sure. I mean, in that specific case, what I think was referencing there is, I mean, you have, I think what I was really thinking about there was probably Jack Kirby and just this idea of like how, all these years later, you still have guys trying to draw like Jack Kirby. You'll get who is it? I believe it's Keith Giffen who he'll just do full issues where he's engaging in Jack Kirby homage.
Right.
Tom Scioli, obviously another guy hugely influenced by Jack Kirby. Although lately Tom Scioli's been doing really interesting work and sort of uh, pushing it. Like I wouldn't lump Tom Scioli in with sort of guys inspired by Kirby to such a degree that it haunts them. Tom Scioli's whole philosophy seems to me to sort of embrace the Kirby influence and to continue pushing things in the way that Kirby would. But what I'm referencing in that quote is sort of the idea of comics is a very influence-based medium. We're always talking about the comics we love, always trying to recreate the comics we love.
Yes.
So it's always, there's a sort of this omnipresent history to comics, and comic books are sort of, haunted artifacts because you can see all these influences everywhere, and even if they're not consciously a part of the story, they're an element of that narrative.
I immediately identified with you in that, and also and you talked a little bit about diving into Grant Morrison and diving into the Invisibles and how that was such an influence and how it sort of influences Theremin. How did you discover Grant Morrison?
Not even. It's another one of those things where I can't even remember where I discovered Grant Morrison. I think it probably would have been like his Big Two work.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but once I did that, I sort of started looking into his older stuff. Well, not his older stuff, the other stuff, the Vertigo stuff, predominantly. And so, yeah, Grant Morrison was a big influence to me, I would say. Uh, but I also feel like there's naturally a tendency in comics critics and comics fans to sort of label everyone who's a little off the beaten path in terms of stylistically as, oh, the next Grant Morrison, want to be Grant Morrison. It's sort of a toxic thing. But
Uh-huh.
no, yeah, Grant's really interesting writer to me, and The Invisibles, obviously a hugely influential piece of work. Uh, but I don't know. I'm at the point now where I'm sort of just being my own influence. I don't really try and pull too
Mm-hmm.
much from anyone else. I'm mostly just interested in what I want to do. So, I mean, I can read, Grant Morrison stuff, John Hickman stuff, whoever, but it's just sort of like at this point I'm mostly interested in just doing what I want to be and sort of, being my own Grant Morrison or whatever. I don't have to read his comics for that. I create it.
When did you know inside that you were ready to make that separation, to sit back? Because I think that's difficult for a lot of people that create. I know it's difficult for me when I'm sitting down to write or to work on music or to draw, and not somehow, like you said, have. That's why I love that quote, like the ghost of an influence is sort of hanging about me. And I think it takes a tremendous amount of confidence to push yourself forward and say, I'm not going to. I guess then I would ask, then, are you able to sort of cut yourself off all of a sudden and just have absolute confidence in what you're working on?
Uh, I think there's, again, two parts to that question where it's like, when did I find myself able to do that? It was well after I'd finished working on Theremin. So, I mean, when I still was writing Theremin, I was still pretty green, and so I hadn't really hit that point of being able to sort of disassociate myself from my influences, which is why the back matter in that comic is basically all, me talking about what inspired it. At this point, though, I think where it really hit me was just about the time we finished up, Pop number one. When I finished that script, and when I started working on that project, was where I was really just like, I'm sort of done with being influenced by people. I just want to just make my own things. And I'm not saying I don't not influenced by anyone. I just mean it's like that's not a part of what I'm doing anymore. I'm over that phase. I just think I'm not that green anymore as a writer. So I've finally gone past that. But during Theremin, definitely I was working through that.
Yeah, and I think it. That's another beautiful, intriguing aspect of Theremin as a whole. Once you take the whole journey with it and you read all of it and you read all the back matter, as I mentioned a little bit earlier about, to me at least, it seemed that I was watching you change issue to issue and watching your thought process evolve and watching how you were actually approaching the comic evolve. Am I reading too much into that, or was that sort of how that was happening?
No, I think you're definitely onto something there. It was like a very sort of autobiographical comic in a lot of ways, to the point where it's like kind of I don't even like read it over again or even really really think about it too much because it's kind of just not something I want to spend too much time with. But no, you're right, definitely very autobiographical, and I think you're pretty spot on with that assessment.
In a later in a later bit of Theremin, you wrote, quote, Oblivion, or actually, I'm sorry, in issue one you wrote, Oblivion, it's what really scares us, because in the absence of everything, anything is possible, which ties nicely into the final pages of issue four. Was Theremin then, you sort of began to sort of speak about this, but I just want to sort of confirm it. Was Theremin then sort of a artistic catharsis? I'll use that word, or for you.
Yeah, was definitely very cathartic to work on in many ways. I guess like there's a lot of stuff in there about you know like Thurman's basically just about everything turning to shit, and it's this guy who's basically trying to stop it.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and that attitude of like everything turning to shit was very much where I was at the point when I started writing it, which would have been like I think late 2012.
Yeah.
I was still very much like processing the death of someone close to me who had cancer, so a lot of that is in there. Uh, and then as it moves on, obviously other stuff from my personal life leaks in there, right? So just like yeah, it's just a very raw science fiction comic with the autobiography is layered in there, but not even in a particularly subtle way, right? I just sort of ran wild with it.
Well, I don't, even though we only know that it's not subtle though till after, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
I think it's absolutely. I guess that's what was so absolutely awing about it when I got to the end of it, and just to let people know, this wasn't like reading 100 or 200 pages of comics. I mean, this is all happening in a fairly short amount of space, and I was I just remember sitting back and sort of scribbling in my notebook and scribbling notes also on the reread for this interview, and just uh, kind of at a loss with things because I felt like I just wanted to reach out and hug you, and give you a hug, man, and be like, it's okay. But that's the great thing too. Like at the very very end, and what I appreciated it as someone who appreciates really personal narrative. I really enjoyed the fact that you seem to come to the conclusion that life goes on and that you can pick yourself up and that art and creation can be a healing force.
yeah. I think when I think about Theremin, it's like a very sort of Charlie Kaufman-esque, like Synecdoche, New York
Sure. Yeah.
experience where it's like it's it's art, but it's art about like making art and also just more broadly about life and existing. So yeah, really to me the piece of art that I most sort of feel it's close to is really Synecdoche, New York, and it's this deeply personal yet highly ambitious science fiction, element infused narrative. But yeah, it's a deeply personal, story, and the whole the whole thing is like I don't know, being done with the book for now. It really looking at it there, but it really does feel like a very specific chapter of my life, and it's like time capsule in a lot of ways because I can when I look at those issues and I read them over, I knew exactly where I was and what I was thinking when I was writing them, right? So it's like yeah, it's definitely like just this weird sort of metafictional slice of time for me.
How did you come to choose Dalton Rose uh, to do the art for this? I'm sorry, to do the art for Theremin. I should be a little more specific.
So I discovered Dalton's art on a really cool self-published, self-distributed comic that him and Sam Humphries did called Sacrifice.
Uh-huh.
And I was really into that comic, also really into sort of the DIY methodology of it. And I discovered Dalton's art through there and like really fell in love with it. And then before I'd even put any comics out, I went to Emerald City Comic Con and I met Dalton there. He was really nice, grabbed his email, and I just sent him an email and we started talking about working together on something and it ended up being this. So that's how that happened.
And did you this what's your process like working with an artist? Are you very detailed in your scripts or do you leave a lot of room to be played with?
I kind of like range between both. I'm detailed when I need to be detailed, and sometimes I just have something very specifically burnt into my brain how I want it to look. So in that case, obviously, sometimes I'll write a paragraph for a panel, but there's other moments where I don't really feel like I need to write quite as much. And always, for the most part, when I work with my artists, I always encourage them if there's a better way of telling the story, like let's talk about it, and then we'll end up changing it. So I try not to be precious about my scripts. Like they're not, Bible. Comics are very much a collaborative medium, and when they're working and they're working well, it's because it's words and pictures coming together to make something beautiful in a way that's really hard to define. So I'm not the type of guy to really, I'm not a script Nazi. I'm not going to be like, you gotta redraw this because it's not, how it is in my script. So I think I try and find like, a middle ground between being really detailed and giving the artist the room to, create something beautiful.
Now, Theremin was or is originally released on Monkey Brain, which is a digital initiative comics platform. How did you come to Monkey Brain, and how did you come to make the decision that Theremin was going to come to the comics community as a digital comic?
Well, the Monkey Brain thing kind of happened just because Dalton had met Chris Roberson at a convention, and he was basically just a really cool guy. And so Dalton had another project, Fabula, which he was going to, just put out there. And when we were discussing and sort of pitching Theremin around, it came up, and there's a couple different reasons, but we just sort of decided to do it over there. And again, big thanks to Chris and Allison for putting it out, being really supportive and just really cool people. They really are, people who just love comics.
What's that process like at Monkey Brain? Is it completely hands off, or how does that work for someone? I guess I'm trying to find out a little bit more about how people might submit to Monkey Brain, and if they do get in, what is that process like once you're in?
Well, as far as submissions go, last time I checked, they weren't even looking at new stuff just because they're only two people, and they're basically putting out an entire slate of books on their own. So I don't really think there is much in the way of submissions happening right now. But in terms of how hands-on or hands-off they are, they're basically entirely hands-off. It's like basically working with Image Comics, where you have your own corner, you do your thing, you send them the files. The most Chris would do would basically be like he'll sort of copy, edit your stuff when you send it in, right? So he'll go through, check if there's any errors, recommend formatting to you, sort of help you make the book look professional when it's done. And again, even that's a lot for him to be doing for the number of books they put out. You know what I mean? Like this is sort of their after hours job, right? Because they both have, Chris writes full time, Allison is over at IDW, doing stuff there. So I mean, this is literally like they finish their day job of the other comic stuff, and then they go and spend a bunch of time putting out all this stuff. So I mean, it's really, really cool of them, but a lot of obviously significant time commitment.
Your work is very, and I don't mean to box it, but I'm if someone is to sort of corner me and say, how would you put this in a genre? You seem to gravitate towards science fiction. How did you come to love science fiction when you were younger? Or I'll assume it was when you were younger. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make such an assumption. I'm just.
Geez, another hard question. If anything's clear to anyone listening by now, so I have basically no recollection of anything and how I come to like anything. It's probably all the dead brain cells. But let's think. I can't even remember coming to like where I like science fiction. As a child, though, I was really obsessed with like Spider-Man, uh, and sort of like cartoons like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Uh-huh.
Biker Mice from Mars, like all this stuff, right? So I sort of fell into my love of like comics and I guess by extension science fiction through cartoons. And then when I was a little bit older, probably about 12, my dad took me to a local comic shop here called Another Dimension.
Hmm.
I went with was me, my dad, my brother, not my brother, my cousin, and my uncle, and I just basically bought a bunch of comics and like a bunch of Batman and Daredevil comics, and that's how I kind of got into comics there. But like the science fiction stuff that like really influences me, I can't really recall how I got into it because it's a lot more. I guess I want to say recent, although it's not particularly recent. But I mean, like it's not like a major discovery. It was something I kind of inched my way towards.
Yeah. What's the where do you, because you said you read Batman and Spider-Man. Um, what do you think is the appeal of those sort of gateway comics in reflection? Like, have you thought about that any now that you are a creator, an independent creator? Um, do you think about, what's the appeal of a character like a Batman or a team like the Avengers?
Well, I think, when you're a kid or when you're younger, uh, they're all very relatable characters. There's a layer of humanity to them. I mean, like obviously some more relatable than others. Like I think, Peter Parker is obviously going to be a lot more relatable than Superman
Hmm.
for various
Sure.
reasons. But they're all fairly relatable characters. There's a really there's like an element of symbology, and they're totemic figures. They're like totems, right? There's you have your bat god, you have your sun god, that'd be Superman, right? He's sort of this omnipresent, almost like ancient Greek hero. He's just chiseled. He's primary colors. So they're really they're symbols, right? So when you're a child, uh, the mythology just really sort of cracks into you. It's there's you don't have to eradicate a lot of walls as a child to find this all American looking guy in the red and blue cape flying around saving people's lives cool. Like it's just they're easily processed mythology, right? It's why children fall in love with these characters.
Do you, I want to transition to Pop now. In reading the first two issues, and for people who don't know, this is your newest series. It's out. It's through Dark Horse Comics. The second issue just dropped yesterday. Um, in reading through these first two issues of Pop, I think that you're sort of challenging readers in some way to evaluate questions of taste and beauty in art and life. Um, did you approach Pop differently than your other projects?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's my first really full format monthly comic series. I'd done all that, sort of growing and really working out the kinks in my writing, mostly in theremin. So, writing this, I was, really ready to sort of don't want to make generalizations and say things like up my game, but I was really, ready to dive in and tell, a big story, but all and play with some big ideas, but also, I wanted there to be a humanity to the story. So on top of having all these big concepts and information we're confronting you with, there's also like you care about the people in the story, right? And there's something very human about our characters, Alan Coop. So that was kind of where I was coming from. It's this marriage of the high concept with the low concept, the human with the mythic, the conceptual.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit of everything, I suppose.
Where do you sort of stand with the whole concept of I guess I'm concerned. There seems to be a small undercurrent of concern in pop to me, like your work, that these that art can be perverted, even in a pop format. Because I like pop art that I think of it as it's supposed to be pleasant. It's supposed to provide you with escape. It's the same category a lot of people would still say about comics in just generally. How do you feel about pop? Like how did you come to try to define pop art?
So the interesting thing to me about that question is you said pop art is supposed to be pleasant, right? So the idea
Oh,
of whether something is pleasant or not is actually not embedded in the process of creating the art. It's about how you receive it, right?
right.
So that's already an interesting idea because say I show you a picture of kittens being killed, you're obviously going to find that unpleasant. There's someone out there on Earth who's going to, enjoy that picture of kittens being killed. So that'd be a pleasurable pop art experience for them. So I
Mhm.
mean, this idea of art being inherently pleasant or unpleasant is kind of a flawed one because I mean it's really dependent on who is consuming or receiving the art. Uh, so that's kind of what I think about what you're saying. I'm creating we're creating stuff here that is going to piss some people off. Some people are going to like it, but that end is based on who's receiving it. There's stuff we're trying to say, stuff we're trying to communicate, but I don't think it really is pleasurable or unpleasurable or good or bad or anything. It just is. It just exists, right?
Yeah.
So that end of the feedback loop is based on who's receiving it, right? Some people love it, other people get pissed off by it. Either way, we're making you feel something, and that's a success to me.
Oh, I completely agree. I think that's a an intriguing point about art in general is that I like how you put that actually that it's supposed to make you feel something, whether and to not just be desensitized or to not just be or to I guess that's now that you mention it, it's sort of the am I correct in assuming in reading these first two issues that that's sort of an underlying problem or a very slight theme throughout it that we consume with no emotion.
Well, yeah, I mean that's again. I'm very much of the David Lynch school of thought, where like once I put something out there, I don't want to be telling you really, what it is or how to feel about it. But think something like that, what you just said, you're absolutely right. It's so obvious that it's a critique in that regard that I don't think there's any problem with me just owning up to it.
Oh no, no, I'm not trying to corner you on that. I'm just
Oh no, I don't think you're trying to corner me at all. It's just sort of a line I have to it's a very thin line I have to walk of like answering questions and then basically telling people how to feel what I'm doing, right? Because
right. Yeah.
there's definitely a temptation to cross that line.
How did you? Because it sounds like I would have been if. How did you pitch this? How did you pitch this story not only to Dark Horse but also to your artist Jason Copland?
Well, Jason, I just kind of known for a couple years, just through like basically comic conventions, uh, and we just sort of talked about working together after Emerald City. It would have been 2013, and I'd have this idea for quite a while, sort of cooking in my mind. And I think a couple months after Emerald City, I just approached Jason with it, and he thought it was really cool and wanted to do it. In terms of Dark Horse, we drew the first 5 pages of the first issue. Those are the pages we used to pitch it, and we sent them over there to an editor Jason had known, who now is I've become quite close with, and is an editor who I'll hopefully be working with for quite a while, Dave Marshall, and he took a little bit to look it over because he's a busy guy. But once he checked it out, he loved it and he sent it forward to Mike Richardson, who approved it, in like a day or something, and we're sort of off to the races.
How did you what advice, if any, could you give young people, or just I guess people in general out there who are thinking about writing comics or trying to write comics and trying to get their stuff out there? What sort of advice could you give them?
Well, first off, there's like a lot of really bullshit and pretentious advice online by basically every wannabe comic writer uh, on how to break into comics. Right? There's some guys who basically just get their kicks doling out this advice when they've really done nothing.
Yeah.
So first, I would tell you to just disregard that bullshit, and basically I would encourage. The only way I know how I can only speak from what I did, okay?
Right.
And what I always did was I always really try really hard, and even now, to not focus on craving success or wanting to be successful or anything gross like that, and just what are the stories I have to tell? What are the stories that are going to eat me up inside if I don't tell them? What is a piece of art that only I can make? And every time I've done that, I've had success with it, with LP, with Theremin, especially with Pop. So every time I've done that, it's led me towards that success, but it's because I wasn't seeking it. I was just making something that felt true and felt pure and special to me. And so that would be my advice. Just make the comic or make the novel or whatever that you have to make.
Do you have a repository of you said that Pop had been sort of building up inside of you for a while, and that you write because you have all of these ideas you have to get out. Do you have a repository sort of stories and ideas, or do you think that there'll come a time when you'll take a break until you can sort of re-energize?
No, not at this point. I have like tons of ideas all the time, and I'm always like moving forward in various degrees towards creating them. Now, I'm not one of those people who's always pitching ideas or constantly pitching stuff. I do, it's been the last thing I pitched was probably in April.
Hmm.
It got greenlit, but I mean, I just wait and I work on things and I let stories grow to the point where it feels like right to pitch them. Because a lot of the process is me deciding whether this is something I want to spend a year or whatever making, right? So I try to be a little self-censoring in ways, but I'm always working on something. So I don't know if I'll really ever take a break because it's just sort of what I do.
It, your comment makes me think about one of my most favorite anecdotes by David Lynch. I once saw in an interview he did with Elvis Mitchell. There used to be this show that used to come on. I think it was IFC, long time ago, late '90s, early aughts, where Elvis Mitchell would the LA, I think he was the LA Times critic at the time, interviewed directors, and it was really some of the first opportunities I had ever had to watch interviews with people I really admired, like P.T. Anderson and David Lynch and all of them. And Lynch said something very interesting about ideas and how he comes to them. This was his anecdote about fishing. Have you ever heard this one?
Yeah, catching the big fish.
Yeah, catching the big fish, and that so you want to catch the fish, you want to do it, but sometimes it just takes time. And
Exactly. That's
it,
perfect analogy. Also, the David Lynch's analogy of fishing or catching the big fish, also kind of like Alan Moore's idea space, right? So
right.
like why riding the waves of idea space or whatever, diving in until you find something that takes hold of you. I think those are both excellent analogies and very much in tune with what I think in terms of ideas and creating things.
And that's sort of how I encourage not only myself but others that I engage with when I talk to them and they ask about how the creation process works. I kind of always just use that default, and it makes me smile because David Lynch makes me smile just in the way of his being, in the way that he creates. And I think that's a good high note for us to sort of wrap things up on this evening on After Wednesday. I've been talking tonight with creator Curt Pires. Thank you so much, Curt, for spending some time with me and with everybody else tonight. Can you hang out for a second while I wrap things up?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. I just want to say again, thanks for everybody for tuning in this week. Feel free to share the show via Google+, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, whatever your choice of poison is. On Twitter, if you want to contact me or to interact with the show, I'm at JLDPROD2002. If you wish to contact Curt Pires, his website is curtpires.com. On Twitter, you can contact him at Curt Pires. My Twitter question for everyone this week is, what comic book creators have influenced you? And make sure that you hashtag that with After Wednesday so everyone can join in on the conversation and we can sort of share our ideas. So again, thank you so much to Curt Pires, and thank you to everyone else. And everybody be safe, and we'll be back next week. So till next time.